So recently I've been a bit sick and I was binge watching YouTube, as you do, and I started going down the rabbit hole of cave diving disasters. And inevitably there were the rescue missions to bring the bodies up and out of the cave, and the rescuers risking their lives to do so, often dying in the process themselves. Which poses the question, should the living risk their lives to retrieve the dead? Just how much is a body worth in this scenario? Before we begin, we post death and dying related videos every Friday, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, consider subscribing to the channel. Now let's talk body retrieval in cave diving. What is cave diving? Cave diving is diving into a cave full of water, obviously. But what does that actually look like? The training you need to be a qualified cave diver is the highest of the high. An open water diver is unlikely to cut it in a cave because while they both put you underwater, they're very different in terms of navigation, line management, gas management, operating in confined spaces, and the obvious fact that a diver is physically constrained from direct ascent to the surface during much of a cave dive. The water in caves can have a strong flow as well. Most caves flooded to the surface at the cave's mouth are either springs or siphons. Springs have an outflow current where the water is coming up out of the earth and flows across the land's surface. Siphons have an inflowing current where, for example, above ground river goes underground. So unless you have watched a lot of these videos yourself, you might find it difficult to understand just how constrained these divers are during this process. So let's look at some maps here from various cave diving spots around the world. As you will notice, there are a lot of very narrow corridors, sometimes just big enough to squeeze yourself through. There are a lot of tight bends, and remember how deep underground this actually goes. If we move on to look at more footage, you can see the issue with lighting, silt being stirred up that inhibits what you can see, and the issues that you may have if you really start to panic. Cave diving is perceived as one of the more deadly sports in the world. And this probably is true, but the perception may also be exaggerated because the majority of divers who have died in these caves have either not undergone specialized training or have had inadequate equipment for the environment. And I gotta admit, after watching a lot of these videos of these cave diving accidents, you do start to see a theme of incompetence and ego. Not all, some deaths were legitimate accidents that they never could have seen coming. But most of them leave you yelling at the screen, "What's wrong with you? How could you be that stupid? You went alone. You didn't tell anyone where you went. You didn't have any different types of gas. You didn't take a torch with you. For God's sake, what's wrong with you?" Even with a well-planned dive, the list of what can go wrong in a cave dive is almost endless. Equipment or light failure, leaking scuba tanks, broken guidelines, getting lost, cave collapse, stirring up silt resulting in zero visibility, poisonous gas mixtures. The list goes on, and it only takes one small thing to go wrong for you to die in that scenario. So let's look at the for and against arguments often put forth for bringing the body back to the surface. Yes, remove the body. Having looked at cave diving body retrieval companies and organisations, and I'll link a few of them in the description, many recount that it is often something that they have to do at the request of a landowner, which could be the government if the cave was in a state park, or the landowner on private property, which allows public access. One retrievalist said, "Sometimes it's private property cave in someone's backyard who doesn't want a dead body contaminating their well. Bodies need to be removed to keep relations with the landowner good." The sort of leave no trace mentality. The other thing these companies often mentioned was that by the time they got there, emergency services is already waiting, which means police have to conduct an investigation to make sure a crime didn't occur. Everything needs to be documented and catalogued and the body retrieved to determine if there was any fault to be assigned. This information may be used in lawsuits down the line. People involved in these recoveries are explicitly told not to discuss the circumstances of the death, often for months or years, until the litigation is settled. Many divers themselves believe that it is important to retrieve the bodies of dead divers for learning purposes, to try and figure out what happened and why. Much of human knowledge has come from assessing our failures, and we go on to improve what we do next time. Although judging by the result of more recent cases, not many new discoveries have been made because the people that died more recently simply didn't follow the information learnt from previous deaths in the first place. You can lead a fool to knowledge, you can't make him learn from it apparently. Further, there is the case to be made for environmental impact. that leaving the bodies down there would add a sudden influx of nutrients which would cause unwanted ecological disruption. That's a quote. Now, that part seems unlikely, especially considering the various water temperatures, currents and the like. A once-off natural decomposition is unlikely to have a great environmental impact. The natural world is fragile, yes, but it's not that fragile. However, it is also pointed out that perhaps the body could be left down there, but there is still the issue of all the gear that the diver was wearing. Multiple gas cylinders, breathing apparatuses, wetsuits and the like are not going to decompose down to nothing, and that certainly could be an environmental hazard in a confined space. There is also the argument that a body may pose a danger to future divers in the area. Now, there is certainly a medical argument for that in caves with warm water temperatures and minimal current, not so much for cold water and high current. The biggest argument for bodies being a hazard to future divers is the potential for panic when they stumble across it. You have a very limited amount of gas on you to breathe, and if you panic, you take in that gas quicker, and that could be fatal if you can't make it to the surface in time. The last argument is the obvious one, for the families. Bringing the body back to the surface allows for families to say goodbye and perhaps bury them in a place of their choosing, which allows for closure. Now, I don't think this really needs to be elaborated on, you get the idea. So now, let's look at the flip side of the argument. No, leave the body down there. There are two main reasons to leave the body in the cave. The first reasons divers give is the expense for the retrieval effort, which can take weeks with dozens of people. Even if the retrieval company are doing this out of charity, the logistics are not free and not cheap. Feeding and housing all of those people, machinery hire, supply hire, insurance, just to name a few. This kind of diving takes a very long time, which brings us on to the second reason, the safety of the divers retrieving the body. Cave diving in itself is dangerous. Cave diving to retrieve a body is so much worse. It's not a simple case of just jumping in, 10 minutes dive down and yanking them back to the surface. Multiple dives need to be done to equip the area, locate the body, plan the best route and other logistics, multiple decompression sessions to ensure the release of nitrogen and other gases from the divers' bodies. All need to be done before actually conducting the dive that will bring the body back up. And any of those things could be deadly. Multiple professional rescue divers have died while trying to retrieve the body of other cave divers, and then they themselves need to be retrieved as well. Many divers state they know the risks of what they're doing and they accept them, and they do not want someone else to die while trying to retrieve them. Other musings. Like we just said, most divers know the risk of what they're doing every time they go into a cave, or at least those that have actually bothered to properly train themselves. And therefore, they understand the dangers that would come with trying to retrieve their body, and many seem to have made peace with that. However, many of their family have not. It's interesting the different reactions of families to these deaths. Some are insistent that everything must be done no matter the cost or the risk to other divers to retrieve their family member. But some say they died doing what they loved and they don't want to risk anyone else's lives, so leave them down there. After several losses in one cave, particularly if they happen all in one accident, a cave entrance may be sealed shut so no one else will die. Of course, there will always be individuals who feel that it is their right to enter whatever cave they like, which seems to really piss off more highly trained and professional divers, and I can certainly understand because arrogance and ignorance will kill you in cave diving. Evidence has shown that. Mother Nature and the natural world do not give a shit about you. The other part I find interesting in all of this is that people seem to expect that dead cave divers should be retrieved and a living diver should put their life at risk to bring the dead to the surface. There are entire organisations dedicated to this, and they state all of the ethical, environmental and practical reasons we stated earlier. And yet, there are bodies piled up on Everest and people seem okay with that and don't expect the living to risk their lives to bring the dead back down. Now, I'm in no way saying they should, but the cost of going up Everest is enormous, especially compared to cave diving, which means you gotta have money, and money usually talks. But we don't hear about rich families demanding their loved ones' bodies being brought back down the mountain. Also, the well-off folks going up the mountain don't seem concerned about their environmental impact. I'm not sure if you've seen the photos, but it's pretty disgusting what's up there. So maybe die doing what they love means different things in different environments. Now personally, I kind of lean on the side of the living shouldn't be putting their lives at risk for the dead, but it does make you wonder about the different types of people who partake in these activities, the different environmental consequences of having a body there, and just what the body means to the living and how much the living are willing to go through to receive closure. After watching all those cave diving disaster videos, I was fully on board with leaving them down there. But after researching about it, I'm now on the fence because I see both sides. And I'm interested to know your thoughts about all this. So let us know in the comments after you give this video a like. And with that, go talk.